Back in 2012, an LDS member named Jeremy Runnells published an open letter he sent to a director of the church's education system. In it, Jeremy listed 13 items that concerned him regarding the church's truth claims. His concerns were never resolved, and he eventually left the church. Since that time, thousands of people have read and grappled with the same issues Jeremy faced. Many have also left the church, and some have stayed. People on both sides of the LDS Church's truth claims have argued their sides, and a lot of discussion has taken place. I first read the CES letter almost 2 years ago, in 2022. Some of it concerned me, some of it seemed flimsy, but I had to respect Jeremy's courage to publish it to the world. Since starting my channel, I've wanted to get around to looking at it again, and today seems like as good a day as any. So in this video, I want to take a look at each of Jeremy's claims and compare them with my own beliefs and findings. I plan on looking at each of Jeremy's 13 sections individually. However, I want to go a little out of order and save the 2 Book of Mormon sections till last. So here we go, starting with the first vision. So the problems. Jeremy shows that there are 4 different accounts of the first vision that contradict each other. And I agree, this is a huge problem. Only one account is written in Joseph Smith's own handwriting, and it differs substantially from the other accounts. And that's bad. Jeremy also points out that, quote, the first and earliest written account of the first vision in Joseph Smith's journal was 12 years after the spring of 1820. There is absolutely no record of any claimed first vision prior to this 1832 account, unquote. So the fact that the first account was given so late after the event was supposed to have happened doesn't make much sense. And I agree that this is also very problematic. The church led me to believe in its videos that Joseph was telling everybody about it at the time, and that's why he was so persecuted when he was a kid. But the facts don't seem to bear that out, and that's a problem. Jeremy's final issue with the first vision is the question, who really appeared to Joseph Smith? Because each of the 4 accounts claims someone different does the appearing. The Restored Gospel podcast recently did a great episode on this, highlighting that the story of who appeared changed greatly with time. Joseph's own 1832 record said that only Jesus appeared to him. Later records claimed that an angel or multiple angels, and finally God and Jesus appeared at the same time. And so which, if any, of these accounts is true? I have no way of knowing. So my conclusion on this issue? I really don't know if Joseph had this vision. The Book of Mormon itself says that the Lord will not manifest himself unto the Gentiles at any time. Was Joseph Smith a Gentile? And if Joseph did have this vision, why did his story change so greatly over time? I'm not completely on board with Jeremy here that it definitely didn't happen, but I also don't know if it did. All right, the second issue, the Book of Abraham. The problems. Jeremy goes a bit into the weeds explaining the issue of the Book of Abraham. So I'll try and summarize his main point, and then I'll add a few of my own. So Jeremy's main point is that the papyrus that Joseph Smith supposedly used to translate the Book of Mormon exists today, but is not accurate. As the LDS Church says, quote, none of the characters on the papyrus fragments mention Abraham's name or any of the events recorded in the Book of Abraham. Scholars have identified the papyrus fragments as parts of a standard funerary text that were deposited with mummified bodies. These fragments date to between the 3rd century BCE and the 1st century CE, long after Abraham was to have lived. Unquote. So yeah, that's bad. Jeremy nails this one. I'll also add that there are other equally important reasons why I personally don't believe in the Book of Abraham. First of all, there's no witnesses. Moroni showed the true pattern when he said in Ether 5:3, and unto 3 shall the plates be shown by the power of God. Wherefore they shall know of a surety that these things are true, and in the mouth of 3 witnesses shall these things be established. The Book of Abraham has no witnesses. Also, there was no interpreter stones used. Mosiah says that, and now Mosiah, translated the plates by the means of those 2 stones which were fastened into the 2 rims of a bow. Now these things were prepared from the beginning and were handed down from generation to generation for the purpose of interpreting languages. The Book of Abraham was not translated with the 2 interpreter stones given by God. We know that by that time they had long since been taken back by the angel Moroni. So, those are problems. And also, the patterns, the language, and especially the doctrines in the Book of Abraham to me just do not match the Book of Mormon. The Book of Abraham is much more like the Old Testament, which goes right along with everything else the church was doing by the time the Book of Abraham came around, such as seeking out ancient rituals, covenants, and all the parts of the law of Moses. My conclusion on the Book of Abraham is that I do not believe the Book of Abraham to be true in any way. I don't know exactly who wrote it or why, but I'm with Jeremy on this one. I just don't believe it. Okay, his third issue, polygamy. The problem. Jeremy shows how the church leaders, and especially he shows that Joseph Smith, taught and practiced polygamy in direct contradiction to the original D&C sections 101, 13, and 65. And I would add Jacob 2, which clearly outlaws polygamy. Like Jeremy, anyone who has watched my channel knows how I feel about polygamy, that it is not in any way from God and goes against everything taught and shown in the Book of Mormon, and so I agree that it is totally bad. After looking at this issue for a couple of years now, I also see how good people can disagree over whether or not Joseph Smith or Brigham Young was the first to practice polygamy. I'll say right now, I don't know who was first. I personally lean towards Brigham Young because I have seen no compelling evidence besides the words of others that Joseph ever did it. For example, there were just no pro-polygamy teachings published during Joseph's lifetime, and more importantly, there are no children of any of Joseph's 30 or 50 claimed marriages. However, there's no bulletproof evidence that Joseph didn't practice it either, so it just comes down to who you choose to believe. My conclusion is that whether Joseph or Brigham was the first to practice polygamy, this question misses the bigger point. The point should be, is polygamy from God? The LDS Church from 1852 to the present has consistently and openly taught that it is from God, and I disagree 100%. Polygamy is not from the God of the Book of Mormon, and never has been, nor ever will be. I'm convinced that polygamy is a false doctrine invented by lustful and power-hungry men. Okay, number 4, prophets. The problem. Jeremy states the church claim that, quote, "The Lord will never permit me or any other man who stands as president of the church to lead you astray. It's not in the program. It's not in the mind of God. If I were to attempt it, the Lord would remove me out of my place." Unquote. And, quote, "Keep the eyes of the mission on the leaders of the church. We will not and cannot lead you astray." Unquote. However, Jeremy then shows that many times the leaders of the church have led people astray on issues such as the Adam-God theory, blood atonement, polygamy, temple ban on blacks, etc., etc. My conclusion on this issue is that Jeremy nails it. False prophets are one of the greatest proofs that the LDS Church cannot possibly be led by God, because the church continually and consistently leads people away from God. There's no sugarcoating this. It is tragic and true. The Book of Mormon, on the other hand, shows prophets whose prophecies do come true, whose doctrine is unchanging, and who work and show miracles. I know of no LDS leader who has done those things, and so I'm right with Jeremy on this one. Number 5, the Kinderhook Plates. Jeremy's claim is that Joseph found and translated what are called the Kinderhook Plates, and they, just like the Book of Abraham, were claimed to reference the Old Testament and kings of Egypt. The problem, however, is that they were later admitted by the church to be, quote, a 19th century hoax, unquote. My conclusion, just like the Book of Abraham, the so-called discovery and translation of the Kinderhook Plates did not follow the established pattern of the Book of Mormon. There were no witnesses, no interpreter stones given by an angel to interpret them, no heavenly guidance to find the plates, nothing. I don't know who wrote these plates or the translation or why they did it, but it makes no logical or spiritual sense, and so, like Jeremy, I don't believe him. Number 6, testimony and spiritual witnesses. Here Jeremy shows the age-old teachings of the LDS Church that you can know something to be true by simply feeling good about it. He then tries to poke holes in this idea by showing instances of when people felt something was true but were wrong. My conclusions after reading this, I think I've been wrong about things I've felt in the past, that's for sure. But others I felt I've been right about. And so I admit that I don't fully understand feelings and how they work yet, and I don't know if anyone else does either. To me, things I believe in have to connect all my faculties, my logic, my feelings, my inner compass, and what I see around me. If all those things are in agreement, then I tend to believe something is true. And so I agree with Jeremy that feelings can lead us astray. However, I'm still learning how to find actual truth. Number 7, the Priesthood Restoration. The problem. Jeremy shows that just like with the first vision, the accounts of Joseph and Oliver receiving the Aaronic and Melchizedek priesthoods were not heard of until much later than they were claimed to have occurred, and the dates claimed for some of them were problematic. For an excellent video on this subject, please see Hemlock Knott's videos called Is the Aaronic Priesthood Authentic? It was an excellent video. My own personal conclusion, the whole LDS concept of priesthood is so bizarre when compared to the word priest and priesthood in the Book of Mormon. According to the LDS Church, the priesthoods Joseph restored gave men rights to rule, to exercise authority, to govern, and to lead. In contrast, in the Book of Mormon, those called as priests were commanded to be servants, to be below everyone else, and to be humble. There couldn't be more clear opposites. This truth, combined with the cloudy origin stories and the fact the Aaronic priesthood is never even mentioned in the Book of Mormon, caused me to agree with Jeremy and believe these priesthoods are modern inventions of men seeking for authority and power. All right, number 8, the witnesses of the Book of Mormon. Here, Jeremy tries to discredit the Book of Mormon witnesses by claiming, among other things, that many of them were related to Joseph. Some of them believed in supernatural things. Some left the LDS Church and spoke against it. The 3 witnesses were each excommunicated from the LDS Church. And finally, we don't have an actual paper with the signatures of the 8 and the 3 on it. My conclusion after looking over this section is that it's confusing. I feel like Jeremy used the shotgun approach, throwing a bunch of random pellets at the wall and hoping something would hit. The problem, however, is that much of what Jeremy says is self-contradicting. Like the charge that the 3 witnesses were excommunicated from the LDS Church, therefore they can't be true witnesses. Or that others later spoke against Joseph. And yet each of these witnesses maintained their testimonies of the Book of Mormon until their dying days. For a good example of this, read David Whitmer's An Address to All Believers in Christ that he published in 1887, shortly before his death, where he clearly maintains his belief in the divinity of the Book of Mormon, even though Joseph had excommunicated him from the LDS Church. All in all, I think Jeremy was grasping at straws here and didn't make a very good case. In fact, I think he damaged a bit of his credibility. If he proves anything in this section, it is to show that the LDS Church parted ways with many of the witnesses of the Book of Mormon, and yet they still stayed true to it. All right, number 9, temples and Freemasonry. The problem. Jeremy shows that the LDS endowments and covenants look an awful lot like Masonic rituals, signs, and tokens. It seems evident that the Nauvoo LDS leaders, most of whom were Masons, borrowed rituals they claimed were from God, but which actually were just modified Masonic ordinances. My conclusions? I've spoken a lot about this in my other videos, and I agree with Jeremy here. There is no logical person in the world that could look at the similarities and circumstances around the creation of the LDS endowment and not see the clear connection. So that leaves me with the fact that either Masonry itself is from God, or the LDS temple ordinances are not from God. There is no middle ground. I personally believe they are not from God, and they are instead the fulfillments of clear prophecies in the Book of Mormon regarding evil secret societies, secret oaths, and secret covenants. Number 10, science. The problem Jeremy sees is that many LDS leaders have taught a young earth doctrine over the years, such as that Adam fell in the year 4000 BC. He also shows that according to what science currently understands, the earth and mankind are much older than the LDS Church has taught them to be. My conclusions? Well, growing up, I was also taught the LDS young earth doctrine. However, over the past year, I've spent many hours reading about the latest discoveries in archaeology and anthropology and find them to be fascinating. There's just so much that is yet to be discovered and understood, and there is simply so much we just don't know. We have theories, we have models, we have forms of trying to test and understand the past, but no one, and especially the actual experts, claim to know exactly how history unfolded. And so I stay on the sidelines of religion and science and wait to find out what the history of the world really is. Until then, I believe in the Book of Mormon, whose teachings do not specify dates, and their teachings are vastly different from the LDS claims in this area. Number 11, he titled Other. This was kind of a catch-all category where Jeremy talks about the church's problems with dishonesty, censorship, changing its own history, anti-intellectualism, and the witch hunts it conducts for so-called apostates. My conclusions on this section are that Jeremy is stating the obvious truth here. There is no arguing with the fact that the church tries to control the narrative, often through lies, propaganda, manipulation, and silencing dissenting voices. As someone who was excommunicated personally solely for pointing out these same problems of the church, I agree completely with Jeremy here. All right, time for an intermission. So far, I think Jeremy has done a pretty good job of showing serious problems with the LDS Church and its claims of being God's one true church on earth. He's highlighted false doctrines like polygamy, masonry, and priesthood restoration. He's shown problems with the origin stories of the first vision, the Book of Abraham, the Kinderhook Plates, and he's questioned the church's teachings on science and spiritual feelings. I think all of these concerns are valid. And so now I want to shift gears and look at what he says about the Book of Mormon. Okay, so number 12, Book of Mormon problems. Up to this point, a lot of what Jeremy has written has been pretty logical and methodical. But in this section, he's kind of all over the place. His main point seems to be that the Book of Mormon isn't true. And to make that point, he provides the following supports. First, that the Book of Mormon italicizes certain words that the King James Version also italicizes, including 3 Nephi 24:10, which are the words of Malachi. I was not aware of this concern, and so I looked in the original 1830 version of the Book of Mormon at Malachi's words, and this is what I found. I couldn't find any italics. And so what's he talking about here? I don't know. Maybe Jeremy is looking at a later LDS version of the Book of Mormon. I think that's probably what he's doing. It's kind of a strange support to use to disprove the Book of Mormon, and I'm not really impressed with it. Number 2, Jeremy also says the Book of Mormon has passages that are similar to the Bible, of course, but that many of them differ from Joseph Smith's later revisions to the Bible. Okay, I agree, that is confusing. But does that prove the Book of Mormon to be false? Or does that prove Joseph Smith's later changes to the Bible are false? From what I've studied, I don't believe Joseph Smith's changes to the Bible were inspired. I think they were largely copies of another man's work. And so just like the Book of Abraham, this is less a proof against the Book of Mormon and more a proof against Joseph's later attempts to translate things without divine help or the interpreting stones. Next, Jeremy says that the DNA research has concluded that Native Americans didn't originate in the Middle East, and that because in later printings of the Book of Mormon, the LDS Church added title pages saying the Lamanites are, quote, the principal ancestors of the American Indians, unquote, then the Book of Mormon can't be true. But there's a couple of major problems with this logic. First, what the LDS Church decides to print on a title page has nothing to do with the original Book of Mormon. It just has to do with the LDS Church. So if what it prints is wrong, it does prove the LDS Church is wrong. Number 2, the original Book of Mormon made no claim at all that it occurred in North America. That was only done by the LDS Church. Number 3, even if the Book of Mormon had occurred in a part of North America, DNA findings have changed drastically since the time Jeremy wrote this letter in 2012. Within just the last 5 years, archaeologists have discovered a major new DNA group in North America whose origins remained unidentified. So until we know who those people were, we don't have definitive proof. And number 4, in summary, I don't see any of these claims going against the Book of Mormon itself. Instead, they go against later LDS teachings that aren't supported by the Book of Mormon. All right, Jeremy's next issue is that of anachronisms, or things that don't appear to be placed correctly in the historical timeline. He says that because the LDS Church claims the Book of Mormon to take place in the Americas, and archaeologists haven't discovered some of the things in the book, such as wheat, cattle, wheels, chariots, steel, and iron, that the Book of Mormon can't be true. Again, the logic of this claim has a couple of issues. Number 1, it is founded on the claim by the LDS Church that the Book of Mormon happened in the Americas. And once again, the Book of Mormon itself never says it took place in the Americas, nor do the many descriptions of the book's geography resemble North America in any way. If anything, the LDS Church saying it took place in the Americas merely suggests that the Church doesn't really understand the Book of Mormon. Number 2, anachronisms are a moving target. Every one of the things on Jeremy's list had been discovered somewhere in the world by the time the Book of Mormon occurred. In other words, cattle, wheat, wheels, etc. did exist elsewhere in the world. And if they existed elsewhere in the world, who are we to say they didn't exist in the land of the Book of Mormon, wherever that was? Number 3, technologies are gained and lost over time. This is true of so much of history. A nation will discover a technology such as raising wheat or such as Greek fire, which can later be lost, only to be later discovered again. And so saying that people of a specific area of the world could never have had a certain technology because they didn't have it at the time they were discovered by the West doesn't necessarily mean that it never existed. Number 4, archaeology is also a moving target. As of 2024, only a tiny fraction of the Earth's surface has been examined by archaeologists. A tiny fraction, like a minuscule fraction. And so much is being discovered every year that we had no clue about before, like vast cities just recently discovered beneath the rainforests of the Amazon, and a huge ancient city near New Orleans in the US. There is so much yet to discover. How can we claim with certainty that something never existed? And number 5, on each of these issues, spending time reading and understanding modern archaeology helps me to realize that we have a lot yet to learn and understand about our past, and making broad generalizations about what couldn't have existed might prove to be a bit premature. I'd be careful on this one, Jeremy. Okay, Jeremy's next issue with the Book of Mormon is the Hill Cumorah. He tries to show that because the LDS Church has claimed that the hill where Joseph found the plates is the same Hill Cumorah where the Nephites and Lamanites fought their last battle, and that hill near Palmyra doesn't have rusty old swords on it, then the Book of Mormon can't be true. This is an obviously problematic argument, because nowhere in the Book of Mormon does it say the plates were buried on the hill where the final battle was fought. That's just obvious. In fact, common sense would suggest Moroni moved far from that hill to find ore to make plates to which to finish the books of Ether Moroni. Additionally, the hill where Joseph found the plates was never even called the Hill Cumorah until long after the formation of the LDS Church, who then named it as such. Again, at best, this is an argument against LDS leaders and has nothing to do with the actual Book of Mormon itself. And then things kind of go downhill from here in Jeremy's arguments. He tries to make some tenuous links between the Book of Mormon place names in areas around New England and Madagascar, of all places, which I find bizarre. He then tries to make connections between the Book of Mormon and some other books, such as the Late War and the View of the Hebrews, because they have a few similar phrases and basic ideas. However, I was able to read enough in each of those books to see that this claim feels kind of silly and doesn't seem to take the Book of Mormon seriously. It feels like someone saying because a crime was committed in this city with a pickup truck, and you own a pickup truck, that you're guilty of the crime. It doesn't make sense. Such faulty logic would never hold up under serious or fair-minded scrutiny. Number 7, Jeremy's last attempt is to discredit the Book of Mormon by pointing out that the original 1830 version has a, quote, Jesus is God, unquote, view of the Godhead, while later altered versions of the Book of Mormon go along with the LDS doctrine that Jesus and God are separate. Again, I think what Jeremy accomplishes here is to discredit the LDS Church, not the Book of Mormon. The 1830 version of the Book of Mormon remains consistent in its doctrine, while the LDS Church is the one that is constantly changing and rewriting itself. So my conclusions. Almost all of Jeremy's so-called problems with the Book of Mormon are actually just problems with the LDS Church and what its leaders taught after the Book of Mormon was published. From differences between the Book of Mormon and the Joseph Smith translation, to possible DNA misstatements by the LDS Church, to geographical misconceptions taught by the Church, to inconsistencies in the LDS Church teachings on the Godhead, I just don't see any of these as serious problems with the book itself, but instead with the Church. Honestly, I thought Jeremy could have come up with some better arguments against the Book of Mormon, but I think the fact that he lumps the book with the Church, in his view, that kind of blurs his lines of reasoning. Okay, number 13, Jeremy's last section is about the Book of Mormon translation. I've done a full video on this topic on my channel, and I would encourage anyone to watch that video. In short, Jeremy's main problem with the translation is that some people, including President Nelson, say that it was translated with a rock placed in a hat, with the plates being hidden or out of the room, while Joseph and Oliver stated that they translated the Book of Mormon with 2 interpreter stones given to them by an angel, which were fastened in the rims of a bow, and did it by looking through those stones at the plates. My conclusion is that it's impossible to know at this point exactly what method was used for translation. It's just a game of he said, she said. However, whichever method was used, it had to require the miraculous power of God to work. Whether the miracle was enacted one way or another, in the end, it was still a miracle. And so it becomes a matter of faith. Do I believe in miracles or don't I? If I don't, why are we talking about this? If I do I believe God could have given Joseph Smith the power to translate this book? Or do I believe it all was a fabrication concocted by Joseph to dupe people? My personal answer, after reading this book many times, studying its messages, big and small, and seeing the incredible consistency and timelessness of its doctrines, is that it is not the work of man, and definitely not the work of Joseph Smith. I don't believe Joseph ever really understood the Book of Mormon. He didn't use it in his speeches or his teachings. He didn't implement its doctrines in the LDS Church, and he showed a strong misunderstanding of both its geography and its theology. How could an author of such a wonderful book as this not know the book that he himself wrote? It all seems so very unlikely. And so I choose to believe that Joseph and Oliver translated the Book of Mormon by the power of God. At the end of the day, there's much in the CES letter that I think Jeremy got right. I think many of us raised in the LDS Church discover these same issues he articulated. And I think Jeremy shows that so many of the wounds to the LDS Church's credibility today are self-inflicted by LDS leaders throughout the ages. With the help of the internet and courageous truth seekers like Jeremy, the problems with the church are out in the open for all to see. However, I feel that while Jeremy does a good job showing the problems with the LDS Church, he does a less convincing job trying to implicate the Book of Mormon with the church. In my estimation, he fails to point out any real issues with the book itself, and instead just proves that the LDS Church is separate from the Book of Mormon. And so I continue to disassociate the Book of Mormon from the LDS Church. The church being false does not necessarily mean the Book of Mormon is also false, and the truth of the Book of Mormon does not mean the LDS Church is also true. Just as President Nelson has encouraged us to do, I no longer combine the word Mormon with the LDS Church. They are on two diverging paths, and I believe they will continue to diverge until God brings forth the Book of Mormon with his power to all the world. In closing, I want to thank Jeremy. He paid a heavy price for voicing his doubts and concerns. He was courageous to go out on a limb and publish them, which eventually led to his excommunication. I just hope that someday he will be able to read the Book of Mormon once again, but this time with an open mind, unpolluted by the doctrines and deceptions of the LDS Church. And then I'd love to have a long conversation with him about what he thinks of this book. Until then, his CES letter will continue to educate and influence many thousands of people just like me.